I'm Maria Wilson.
And I'm Danielle Mandikian.
And we are scientists. We love science.
Yeah, we do. So when we aren't doing it, the next best thing is to talk about science. And what's really awesome is that we're surrounded by some of the most brilliant minds in research.
We're going to step away from the labs today to talk to other scientists about the cool stuff they are thinking about, working on, and imagining.
As well as how some of these discoveries just might lead to new medicines. So grab your favorite drink, get ready to unlock your science brain, and join us for Two Scientists Walk Into a Bar.
The show for scientists, science geeks, and the people who love them. Can you tell me the difference between hunger, satiety, and appetite?
Hunger is a feeling of that you need more calories. Satiety is when you feel you don't need any more calories. And appetite is, I don't know.
One is how you feel, one is how much you want, and the other is the emotional side of that.
Hunger is something I would say when you don't get food for long.
Kind of the same. Hunger and appetite seem like the same. Hunger and appetite, I don't know, I'm not sure. Or maybe it is like
appetite is you are excited to crave, you want to eat something, but you're not necessarily hungry. It's just like me, I enjoyed my hamburger. I have an appetite to eat it again, but I'm not hungry, I just want another one.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I'm Maria Wilson. So we just recently had a great podcast about obesity, and that's such an important topic these days, we thought we would take another bite at it. So we're going back into the topic, only this time I'm not in the hot seat, thank goodness. I'm joined by our guest, Dr. Manu Chakravarthy, who's an endocrinologist and drug developer in the obesity space. Welcome to the show, Manu.
Happy to be here and thrilled to have this dialogue with you.
So in the previous episode, Danielle and I talked about the biology of metabolic disease and what goes wrong, but we didn't talk very much about the broader impact on society. So while we will dig into the biology again today, I wanted to start out by talking to you about the societal impact of obesity.
Well, the simple fact is that if we don't do anything about it, in about 10 years or so, we'll have about half the world's population. So there's about 4 billion people by 2035. Who would be either overweight or obese. And that's, I don't even know how to contemplate 4 billion people, but it's a lot of people. I mean, it's staggering. As a citizen of the world, you have to sort of look back on that and say, is this how we want to leave our society? And would our healthcare systems cope with this? It's already kind of fractured to some extent, but if we don't do anything, it'll be completely broken. So I think in many ways, and this is ultimately kind of what gets me up in the morning is what can we do to at least slightly even bend the trajectory? And can we do that, with all of the tools that we possibly can muster? It involves, behavioral changes. Yes, lifestyle modifications, still very important. We have to think about exercise and nutrition. I mean, that's not going to go away. But let's also just take advantage of the science. Let's take advantage of the learnings of the biology and then bring all that to bear. And we already have one such powerful medicine, GLP-1, but there are lots of other ones that we can talk about that can show promise to help this burden.
The other thing that I think obesity is different from almost anything else as a disease in that it's societal stigma. It's very obvious when you have obesity, and there are stigmas around it that have nothing to do with health, right? And I think because of this, people find it difficult to talk about sometimes. People feel that it was their own fault that they suffer from obesity because that's perhaps what they've been told, even by their physicians in the past, right?
Yeah, it's a really sad thing because our cultural obsession of the physical image is so pervasive. And that's partly also, in my own view, to blame to this in the way that we've kind of allowed society to kind of put so much emphasis on sort of the physical appearance without regard to the consequences of health. And by actually not acknowledging that, right? I think we not only stigmatize obesity, but we also do a lot of disservice to patients who actually can really benefit from intervention. And so because of that, there's actually fewer people who feel that they want to go to their physicians and actually talk about this because they feel like they'll be judged. It truly is a vicious cycle, and something that I think a lot about and figure out, how do we sort of address this? And one way could be just the way that we use the language of obesity, and then the focus on using that in the context of health. So I like sort of simple acronyms, and I came across this acronym called ABCD, adiposity-based chronic disease.
Interesting. I like it.
What I like about it is that it sort of emphasizes a couple of things. One, that it's an acknowledgement that obesity is a chronic disease. And well, I know it took only about 20 years, but the FDA actually just released guidance. For the first time, they actually used the word chronic disease. It had never been used by the US FDA before. And so to see that is a further affirmation that finally maybe people can recognize and maybe start to equate why are we treating obesity? Because it's a chronic relapsing disease, just like, it's diabetes or heart disease or cancer, right? So for none of those diseases would we ever say to people, just will yourself and your cancer will go away. We
Right.
would never say that.
And we wouldn't say, oh, you tried diet and exercise, it was effective for you, but now it seems to have stopped working. We're like, oh, well, maybe you need a more powerful treatment.
Or at least, let's work with all of the biology that we understand and help you overcome some of that. And then ultimately, what we're following is the outcomes.
Right.
So that's one way. There's also so many different other ways. When we think about obesity as a chronic disease, I think you shift the focus from a weight-centric, only unidimensional component to a holistic, patient-centered sort of way of looking at it. And then the focus on just not a single point, a single measure, which is body weight, but really body composition becomes really relevant. I do envision a world where I think, standing on your scale, where we all, at some point in time we do that and we get this weight number, you can also get the body composition analysis done. You can do that already, by the way.
I have one of those, Manu. I don't like it.
Yeah,
I don't like what it tells me.
Well, sometimes you have to just sort of think about it from the perspective of, again, not the unidimensional number, but the whole, the component as well.
So I think it's really interesting that we now probably know that GLP-1 receptor, the receptor that mediates the response to the GLP-1 drug, is actually in lots and lots of different cells and tissues of the body. For the obesity effect, I think we mostly understand that as being in the brain. Is that how you understand it? Or are there other organs that are involved in the anti-obesity effect as well?
So I think the first recognition was the fact that these receptors are in the stomach. So it slows down gastric emptying. So that means that the food that is getting through our GI tract is slower in terms of its passageway. And so that in itself can trigger the brain to say, hey, I'm full. So the sensation of fullness is what we would call maybe a peripheral effect. But the new learning from the science is that there are some receptors in a very specific part of the brain called the hypothalamus. It's a part of the brain that controls very basic things like temperature, food, and even a barometer of the body's weight. And this so-called the body weight set point is thought to reside in this organ. So as we learn more about these things, we're recognizing that there may be a direct action on the appetite centers of the brain, which could also be a central effect. So there's both a peripheral effect and a central effect. And it's also thought that why this sort of tolerability issue that comes up that a lot of people talk about, feeling nauseous and other GI-related effects, might be also centrally related because the nausea centers are also in the brain.
So interesting. You said something that piqued my interest and I think links back to the previous episode, which is about this body weight set point and about the idea that I think a lot of people are still getting to grips with, which is that we don't have very much control actually over the size of our body, that there is a part of the brain that has decided somehow for us that we are supposed to be a certain size and drives us to eat enough food to maintain that size. And that's one of the reasons it's so difficult to lose weight.
So you talked about this in your previous episode. This has been a topic of hot debate for so many years. But I think conceptually, I think we can understand why there must be a set point. Let's sort of imagine ourselves, 50,000 years ago when we were hunter-gatherers. As our species evolved, we as a species had to sort of depend on long periods of what we call feast and famine. There was no guarantee that food was going to just be delivered to your door like we have today, right? I mean, you had to actually go out and gather those berries or hunt that deer or whatever else you had to do. No guarantee that that was going to happen. Our ancestors would go potentially for days without eating. And so one of the most important things about evolution is the propagation of species, right? So if you have to preserve yourself as a species, you have to defend the body weight. And so that's where the origination of the so-called body weight set point really comes from, because without that, we would have been eliminated as a species. So now, of course, let's fast forward to, 2025, where you can literally press a button and boom, food appears in front of you. So you don't even have to leave your couch to get that. But we still have the same genes, even though our environment has changed. And so in this world, now the so-called set point is still there, but instead of worrying about, where is my next meal coming from, you're constantly in this food abundant state. And so that's one of the most sort of dramatic differences that has occurred. And a lot of people think, genes have changed. But genes don't change in a span of 10 or 50,000 years. Our environment has changed dramatically.
Yeah. And how do you think that the incretin class of medicines interact with the set point? Do we know?
I don't think we precisely know exactly how this is working, but the indirect effect comes from, or the indirect, I should say, the evidence, comes from the basic observation, which is that, you put people on a GLP-1 agonist, they lose a ton of weight, and then, people get excited about, I lost like 60 pounds. And then they'll say, I've got to my goal, I'm done, and then they come off of it. And guess what happens?
They gain weight again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So all that lost weight comes right back.
Yeah.
So is that because the body is defending itself? Because, again, remember the evolution that we just talked about. We are programmed to protect our weight loss or defense against this weight loss, which is very important in this environment. Mm-hmm. But, 10,000 years ago, that was detrimental. But that's the same genes that we still have. Yeah. So that's in a very simplistic way why the weight is kind of regaining back. Now we understand a little bit more about it, and we've given it a term, called metabolic adaptation.
Hi, Maria.
Hi, Wellington.
Hey, Maria.
Hey, Karen.
So I always have the feeling that I should know something. I got that feeling when I heard central versus peripheral effect. What exactly is that?
Oh, that's such a great thing to clarify. It's quite simple, really. Central means in the brain, and peripheral means any other part of your body that is not your brain.
And how does this relate to GLP-1s?
So it relates to GLP-1s in the context of where these drugs that mimic GLP-1 might act in the body. There's receptors for GLP-1s in multiple different places, including in the brain. It's in the regions of the brain that control appetite and hunger, and in other parts of the brain too. But it's difficult to know when you give somebody a drug where its site of action is. Like, is it acting in the brain, or is it acting in other parts of the body as well? And we don't always actually know unless you do very detailed types of studies to find out where it's going.
Manu was talking about receptors in the brain, but also in the gut. And how does this relate to the gut-brain axis?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really important question. And it's almost, it complements the question Wellington just asked as well, because your gut is a peripheral tissue, but the gut and the brain communicate very, very closely with each other, both through the hormones that are released by the gut go through the bloodstream and go to the brain. That's what GLP-1 does naturally. But also there's the vagal nervous system, right, and the enteric nervous system. And so there's also a communication from mechanosensory properties of the gut. The gut knows what's going through it, and the gut's motile. And then that sensory nervous system feeds back into the brain as well. So I think it's a really rich area of biology that is being explored, understanding how the gut communicates about nutritional status to the brain. So, Manu, you and I have talked about this before. One of the ways I try and think about it, which may be right or wrong, is that, yes, you're on your incretin, you're losing weight, you've lost your weight, but underneath that, you're brain, your set point, has still noticed that your weight is declining. And there's all sorts of other hormones and things which have now got dysregulated that would, when you come off the drug, those then kick in and get back to work putting that fat back on that your set point has really not liked that you've lost. Is that a good way to think about it?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's a great way to think about it, and maybe even a simpler way, which is the real frustrating part of the whole thing, is that the set point is so sensitive to weight loss,
yes,
but it's not sensitive to weight gain. Wouldn't it be nice if we could figure out there's a set point that can also defend against too much weight gain, but evolutionarily that was considered to be an advantage, because the more calories you stored, the more you could survive that next bout of famine that you didn't know where your next meal is going to come from. So our set point is set to defend the loss, but it's not set to defend against the gain. And so people have thought a lot about what is actually going on in this so-called metabolic adaptation. And one of them is when we start losing weight, the processes to defend against that loss kind of comes in. One, you shut down energy expenditure. Anything that your body doesn't need extra energy to expend on is going to start shutting down. So your energy expenditure actually paradoxically goes down when you're actually lost a lot of weight. And then, of course, what's the best way to defend against a significant amount of weight? You just have to eat more. So the hunger pathways get revved up. And so I'm sure, well, I've certainly tried all kinds of dieting just for experimentation. And one of the things that I've always noticed is, yes, I can do it for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but then I feel really, really hungry afterwards. And that's the metabolic adaptation.
I'm a woman who grew up in the 1980s. I've been on a diet for 40 years, Manu.
Well, then you know it very well.
Yeah. So this idea of the different hormonal pathways and things involved in metabolic adaptation, I think, is really interesting because it takes us perhaps to another place to have an interesting conversation, which is what are the next generations of drugs we might see in this space, right?
Yeah, it is really interesting. And that is sort of the backbone in which we think about the unmet need. If we can understand these specific pathways, we can make a dent in figuring out, what our unmet needs are. So I think one of the things, again, let's go back to what's happening in this state of metabolic adaptation. Energy expenditure is going down, right? So wouldn't it be nice to be able to have a safe way to turn on some energy burning pathways to overcome that compensatory defense mechanism that so well protected us 10,000 years ago, but we don't need that anymore today because we live in a world of food abundance. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to hack in to the brain and say, hey, don't shut yourself down on the energy pathway, let's rev it up. So that's one of the ways that we could try to overcome metabolic adaptation. And I think you know the answer to this one. There's already a solution to this. The best approach to increase energy expenditure and the safest way is exercise. Mm-hmm. If you can somehow manage to kind of exercise through all of this, you can burn more energy and you can kind of ward off that weight regain and then kind of continue to maintain the weight. But as we all know, it's easier said than done. And I never tell my patients to just go eat less and exercise more. I mean, it's sort of does a little bit of a disservice to the biology that they're fighting against. Right. So we do really need to find something that is like exercise, equally safe, but that can really turn on these.
The whole exercise in a pill phenomenon, right?
I'm torn about that, to be quite honest with you, because there is no such thing, I think, of exercise in a pill, because exercise does so many things, right? It makes you feel good, it gives you more energy. It's very complicated, right? I mean, you can't try to capture all of that into a pill. All I'm saying is that can we just harness just one component of it, which is we don't want to be shutting down the energy burning pathway. We want to be turning it up at the time when you're at the greatest loss of weight.
Yeah.
So that's one way. So that's a pathway that is being actively worked on. So there's some really interesting, cool science about this. There's some things called the uncouplers, which, as the name suggests, it kind of uncouples metabolism in a way that allows you to generate a lot of heat. Now, of course, the bad thing about it is that it makes you generate a lot of heat, and your body temperature goes up, and that's not a very safe thing to do.
I've heard you talk about this, where you really want something maybe in this pathway that just makes your body feel like it's going for a brisk walk, not like running a marathon all day because that's going to be too much.
Yes, exactly. So that's an area of research that is really cool, and lots of people are working on this sort of thing, and we'll have to see, can we make a breakthrough there? And the second part is getting good clarity around the definitions of appetite and satiety and hunger. Many times we kind of intermix all these things. So if you understand those specific pathways, then we can try to figure out, okay, how do we overcome the second part of metabolic adaptation, which is this increasing drive to eat? Okay, again, remember that you're fighting against thousands of years of evolution. So not easy to simply say, oh, you know what, I'm somehow going to will myself to stop eating. And this is why those kinds of advice that we give people, oh, eat less and exercise more, doesn't work. So wouldn't it be a great opportunity, to sort of think about ways of dampening down, if you will, the hunger pathways? So that's one of the other,
And that's different. So that isn't what GLP-1s are doing. They're not impacting those fundamental hunger pathways in the same way as some of the other hormones.
That's right, Maria. Yeah. Because if they did that, right, then the proof in the pudding would have been that even if you stopped the GLP-1s, you wouldn't have gained the weight back. And when you actually ask people, and people have asked this question, when they stop their GLP-1s and you ask them, do you actually, feel hungry? They say, yes, I feel hungry. Even though they have no desire to eat, they still feel hungry. So that's the decoupling. So desire to eat is appetite.
Yeah.
And hunger is a more physiological drive, if you will, to survive.
Once I learned about this, I realized that a sort of dietary technique I've been using my entire life, it's based upon this actually, because I always, if I feel like, I see a plate of cupcakes, which seems to be every meeting I attend, somebody's birthday, there's like cakes in front of you. And you want one, right? They look delicious. But I ask myself, would I eat a hard-boiled egg or an apple right now? And if the answer to that question is no, I'm not hungry, am I? Because if I was hungry, I would eat one of those two things. But I desire. There's an appetite desire thing there for the cupcake. It doesn't mean I don't eat the cupcake, but at least I know why I'm doing it.
No, absolutely. I mean, we all have this, right? I mean, you've eaten this amazing meal, and then you're full, you're very happy with it, and then they present this whole tray of desserts, I have to admit that chocolate cake is my
Me
weakness.
too, Manu. I love chocolate cake.
So I've eaten this, fantastic meal, I'm fully satiated, satisfied, no hunger whatsoever. Physiologically, I don't have hunger, but cake is presented, something's happening in my brain. I'm like, I want that cake. That's the desire. That's the more of the what we call the hedonic feeling, and it's very important. Humans kind of have also survived in some ways, largely because we can recognize pleasure.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that we need to understand as well. That it's not all about just shutting down the hedonic centers, because then you take away sort of the pleasure, if you will. And so that's the other unmet need, is that can we now complement the power of all of this GLP-1 that's there, but also complemented with another pathway that will give you that sensation of satisfaction. And luckily, there are those hormones. So PYY is a good example. It stands for protein tyrosine. It's kind of a very geeky thing to say, but that's what it is. So it's a gut hormone. It's actually, some have argued that it's co-secreted with GLP-1. But the beauty of this hormone is that this is called the satiety hormone. This is what you want. When PYY goes up, you feel really satiated. You feel satisfied.
So it comes up at sort of towards the end of a meal is when it would naturally start to rise.
Yeah. Because that's when you can say to yourself, okay, now I'm full, I feel good, I don't need to eat. So developing something around the PYY could be very complementary to GLP-1s. Another such hormone is a hormone called amylin.
Okay.
That one is actually not secreted by our gut per se, but it's from the pancreas, and it gets co-secreted with insulin. And so that hormone also affects the sensation of fullness, or makes you feel satiated or satisfied. So that's another unmet need that we can potentially address by going after developing drugs against, a PYY, long-acting PYY analog, or an amylin mechanism. So there's a lot of science that's emerging.
Maria, exercise in a pill phenomenon. What is that, and was that a research phenomenon?
So this is a phenomenon that has definitely been shown in preclinical models, and even there are molecules that have been tested or used in people, through various different mechanisms, what they do is sort of trick the cell into a sort of exercise type of energy expenditure state.
Did this go anywhere?
Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting research going on in this area. There's a lot understood about the biology of how the mitochondria, turn food, calories into the ATP, the cellular energy that your cells run on. And in fact, even increasing the number of mitochondria, for example, in your muscle or in your adipose tissue could in itself just increase energy expenditure. So yeah, there's a lot of it. I think it's a pretty promising area of research.
And what about uncouplers? Where are we at with that research?
So the concept of an uncoupler has been around for a really long time. So this is taking you back, if you studied it, to your biochemistry textbook and the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. So your body, when you burn glucose, it goes through the sort of glycolysis pathway, which generates a certain amount of ATP. But the most efficient way to generate ATP energy is through the mitochondrial electron transport chain. And what this does is it breaks down carbon bonds in nutrients, and the mitochondria converts this into ATP, which is the cell's energy source. If you uncouple the carbon source nutrient from the generation of ATP, what you get is heat. There are cells in the body, brown adipocytes. This is their job. This is one of the ways your body makes heat, is through metabolizing nutrients and in an uncoupled way. And if you can just tweak this a little bit more and uncouple a few more mitochondria in some other tissues, you actually would, the same amount of calories, more of it would be dissipated as heat and less of it ultimately stored as fat.
Is that something that would be an additional treatment or a combination treatment with GLP-1s for people?
Yeah, I think it could be. I think, for example, GLP-1s are not tolerated by everybody. So looking for mechanisms that might work better in people who don't tolerate or don't respond to GLP-1s is always something that we want to do. But in addition, GLP-1s also maybe what you want to do is have a lower dose of the GLP-1 that's maybe easier to tolerate and add on a complementary mechanism, right? So you're suppressing the appetite and the desire to eat mostly with a GLP-1, but then you're also improving your energy capacity. With a GLP-1, you'll be getting metabolic adaptation. Underneath that weight loss, the body's probably actually going the wrong way. It's probably burning less energy. So something like an uncoupler could tweak that in the right direction, give you a better response to a GLP-1. And then the other way you could think about these is you could imagine somebody goes on a GLP-1 for 6 months, loses a lot of weight, and then wants to switch to something to maintain. And that's where perhaps something like an uncoupler could fit as well.
It's really interesting when you think about future societal shifts in how we think about adiposity and contribution to disease. What about the future of therapies and medicines? We talked a little bit about that, but I think it would be great to dig in a bit more.
Yeah, this is one of those I have to put on a lens of just speculation, right? Because it's fun to speculate.
It is fun, yeah.
I think one of the things I can foresee right away is that obesity is, first of all, recognized now as a chronic disease, but also a recognition that it's a very heterogeneous disease, which means that we're going to have to start thinking about various segmentations of the disease. Unfortunately, again, this is another disservice that we've done to our patients, which is to lump everything into one, as if obesity is one thing, and we don't do that for cancer, right? I mean, there's 50 types of breast cancer manifestations, because we understand, okay, this is a specific gene, this is a specific mutation. So even though you're dealing with a specific cancer, you know that all that is not created equal. Similarly, I think we need to think about obesity. It's not one thing. There's multiple different kind of segments, multiple phenotypes. And this is where I think the power of AI and ML can come in, artificial intelligence, machine learning, where we can really start to take advantage of big data sets that people have accumulated in big populations, like the UK Biobank, or even here in the US. I mean, there's many health systems that have started to accumulate data around clinical outcomes, how they correlate to their specific genotype, how they correlate to a specific blood biomarker, and so on and so forth. The trick is, how do we actually put all that together and get something meaningful out of it?
Maybe the machines can do it.
That's the whole point of machine learning, isn't it?
Maria, let's talk more about the multiple phenotypes of obesity and how AI and machine learning can help.
Gosh, this is, I think, it's an early area of understanding. Do different people have different drivers of obesity? I think one thing that you can see and know is that there are different patterns of adipose distribution on the body, right? Some people tend to have adipose tissue more centrally. Some people tend to have it more peripheral and subcutaneous, which is a safer place to store adipose. And there's already, I think, quite a lot of genetic understanding of that. But I think in bigger population studies, you could potentially start to look at, different drivers of the way body fat is distributed. Also, are there different brain phenotypes, right? Are there individuals who actually don't eat very much but have a very, very conserved metabolism? That's, sort of historically what people have thought about, 50 genes and 50 metabolism. Are there some people who are just, disproportionately, basically, with pure basic hunger? Maybe those are people for whom GLP-1s maybe don't work as well because there's a stronger drive that can't be suppressed. So I think understanding would be interesting to look at across people treated with the medicines we have, responders, non-responders. Is there anything that we can dig out using AI, machine learning of big data sets, their genomes, their proteomes, that helps us understand why different people respond to medicines differently, and yes, why they have become obese differently. Sure. What are you excited about in the future of the new medicines and the new modalities that are coming our way?
I think there's a lot to be excited about. I really believe that we've just started to scratch the surface. I know that, the world currently is obsessed with GLP-1s, and as we talked about, rightfully so. But if you really started to kind of dig into the definitions of the appetite control and hunger and satiety, and understanding that there are in fact differences, and really understanding, how do we overcome metabolic adaptation, I think the avenue is wide open. And I think in that regard, I really do believe we're really scratching the surface, allowing for people to leverage, all of that learning and the science that's happening all over the world to start to really, attack the problems that still remains to be done. So it can be done through understanding pathways better from which new targets might emerge, or taking advantage of known knowledge about hormones that control those pathways and finding new technologies to apply to actually make them drugs. So one of them is an oral, approach. A lot of people are comfortable taking injections, but there's plenty of people who are needle phobic. They don't like the sight of needles or don't want anything to do with needles. So we have to offer a solution, and an oral pill is a convenient option to have. Some people don't like taking injections every day or every week, or taking anything every day or every week. I mean, when I was kind of under the weather last week and I had to take a short course, 3 days of antibiotics, I think I missed half of them. Because they
do say the doctors make the worst patients.
Yes, I know. I'm the worst patient. So wouldn't it be great to actually have a modality that you can just take as once every 6 months or once every year? And remember we talked about the difficulty in weight maintenance. So I could conceive of a world where you would have had weight loss induction, whether it's 10%, 15% or whatever. And then you could then switch over to a modality where you can just take a single shot and then you're kind of done.
That would be amazing. Amazing for people, I think, because then you just don't even have to think about it. Once every 6 months or even once every 3 months wouldn't be too bad. You just go, you take a shot, and then you just live your life with your adiposity managed and treated.
And the consequences of the adiposity addressed. So those are things on the horizon that I am excited about. We have a lot of work to do to actually make those things, but I do believe in the power of science, so I think we can do it. And then, the other is, clearly just understanding the segmentation of the disease better, so that we can then direct even existing therapies to the people that might have the best response. I'm sure you've seen the data for all these different modalities out there already, right? Some people respond with a very robust, exaggerated kind of response. 50% of their body weight could be lost. And then there are some people who barely lose 5%. So that already teaches you that there is so much heterogeneity.
But that person has somehow a different type of obesity than the person who responded to the drug. And we have no idea really yet on a biological level why that is.
Yes, exactly. And we just call them non-responder to incretins, but maybe they respond to something else.
Yeah.
And so that would be a great opportunity, I think, to understand why are some people quote-unquote hyper-responders, why are some people non-responders, and getting deeper into the molecular underpinnings of that could be quite exciting.
Very exciting.
When you actually look at some recent data that came out of the GLP-1 studies, what was very interesting was that even with very low doses, patients with chronic renal disease saw massive improvements in the renal function.
Even though they hadn't really lost very much weight.
They had lost almost no weight.
Wow.
And that's also true for cardiac protection. And then, of course, there's this very exciting avenue of research around Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, where weight loss is not a dominant feature, but yet the symptoms of those diseases are being impacted.
Manu, thank you so much for this conversation. Really, really enjoyed talking to you.
Me too. Yeah. Clearly, we can talk about this all day long.
We can. Well, maybe we'll have to do another episode.
Look forward to it.
Maria, that was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks.
What do you think this means for areas like people with addictions?
So I think this is becoming a really, really interesting topic. Anecdotally, right? People who are taking GLP-1 medicines are noticing that they don't drink as much alcohol, that perhaps their online shopping is, dialed down a little bit, that things like gambling get dialed down a little bit. This seems to be, I think, a real phenomenon. And it's comes down to, I think, a bigger question is like, what are these drugs doing in the brain? What neural circuits are they involved in? How do they work? Because there definitely seems to be an interface between dopaminergic type of pathways. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter of desire, is what we call it. So it's how our brains have evolved to cause us to go back and do something over and over again for survival. So it's the dopaminergic system is there to help you to make sure that you go out and get some food, right? To make sure that you reproduce. But the dopaminergic system is the system that sort of gets hacked by addictive things, right? The brain is confused. It thinks alcohol, gambling, online shopping are essential for survival, and so it drives over and over again to do it. It seems as if GLP-1s dampen down something in the dopaminergic pathways. And that I think is going to be really, really interesting to explore.
When you were talking about dopamine, Maria, does that mean that GLP-1s could also impact neurodegenerative diseases?
So this is something that people are looking into. There was recently a sort of disappointing readout in Parkinson's disease with a GLP-1 drug that really didn't show any effect. But I think there's also a lot of preclinical data and a lot of people interested in exploring how these molecules could potentially be used in these diseases because they are expressed in relevant cell types, as you pointed out, dopaminergic neurons, for neurodegenerative diseases. And they're also believed to have sort of anti-inflammatory properties. So companies I think the clinical data will really be very informative. It would be great if these molecules do have the potential for benefits in these really important unmet medical needs, for sure, and worthy of exploration. So as you can probably tell, this is just such a fascinating area of research for me and for many of us. There's this interface between your brain, your body, this very basic fundamental thing that we've evolved to do, which is stay alive within our nutritional environment, and how our current nutritional environment is working against us, and we're figuring out how to use medicines to help us to sort of live better in the world we've created. And I really think it's just the beginning of this innovations in this field, and I'm just super excited to see where it goes over the next few years. And that's our show. Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't already, rate our podcast wherever you listen. It will help new people to find us. And be sure to subscribe. If you have a question about the show, you can contact us at podcast@gene.com. That's GENE.com. And now for me, it's back to wrestling with data.